All right, we are on chapter 3. This is called the Kotov variation, and this is when white puts their pawns on e4, d4, and c4. So when you see all three of those pawns up, what we're going to do is we're going to play for a dark squared strategy. We're going to try to put our pawns on d6, e5. Usually we'll put this pawn up on f5, and if white pushes past, we might even put this pawn on c5. So really our goal is let's keep those white pawns locked on light squares, and let's put our pawns on dark squares. What do you think of this strategy, Jesse?
Yeah, so this is like pure modern chess, right? Like you just give your opponent the entire center. Like look at all this space that the white pawns are taking advantage of. We don't care. That's fine. We're gonna leave it. Because the thing is, white is kind of saddling themselves with a pretty bad bishop here. So it's staring at their own pawns. If we can get these breaks in, like Matt was talking about, this bishop is just going to be kind of weak. It doesn't not really going to have a whole lot of scope. That's kind of where our counterplay is going to be at. So we'll see in quite a few of these lines how it looks scary, but when you like really look at the position, it's like a lot of the play is in black's court. All right, so this is going to look similar to a King's Indian defense, but we're going to hold off on knight f6. We're not playing that right away, and we can kind of like trick our opponents in a couple move orders. All right, so after c4, we're going to start with d6, looking for e5 coming up. But we have to prep it a little bit. And we're already at a branching point. So we're going to look at knight c3, knight f3, and f4 in this position. That could be a fun position. Look at all those pawns.
Yeah.
But let's start with knight c3.
So knight c3, this is played about 60% of the time at the club level, and it's also the most popular move at all levels. Essentially, white is trying to play this as if it is a King's Indian defense. And if we were to play knight f6 here, that's a direct transposition to the King's Indian. But like Jesse said, we're not going to go into King's Indian, similar to how we don't go into the Perk defense or the Pierce defense against the pure e4, d4 lines. We're going to play knight to c6 here. There are a few different good moves that I considered, but I really like that we have this direct plan of we want to play pawn to e5. We have our knight backing it up, pressuring this pawn, and this also scores well in the club database. So we're able to just put this pressure on white very quickly. Now here we have a couple different options for white. We're going to look at bishop to e3, knight to f3, and a quick pawn to d5. Let's start with this one, Jesse. Bishop to e3, a natural square. And what do you think white is trying to do when they put their bishop here?
That's a good question. Normally they're trying to castle queenside is what it looks like. So maybe they're gonna play a move like queen d2, bring their queen up, castle this way. That's kind of like a cue. Anytime you see them like weirdly neglect this side of the board, it's like, okay, it's like they're kind of playing their hand there, so it looks like they're going queenside here.
Yep, I agree with you. After bishop to e3, we're going to play pawn to e5 right away. And look at this. We already have a triple attack on the pawn on d4. That pawn is only defended 2 times. So here, the strongest move for white is to push past, and that's what we're going to look at first. And then we'll circle back and we'll look at what happens if white defends that pawn. So pawn to d5. Now we're going to drop our knight back to e7. I will note here, knight to d4 is also playable. But what I like about this move, retreating the knight, is similar to what we've seen in some other chapters. All of our pieces are on the board still, Jesse. We want to keep a lot of play in this position, and our knight is still supporting this f5 break. So white's not able to trade this knight off, and it's also going to help us with the kingside expansion.
Yep, exactly. And when you get your knight up here, they can take and we'll take back. And it kind of is unclear whether this pawn is going to be a strength or a weakness. Generally, when your bishop is backing it up, you can hold it for a while, but it's kind of like a long-term weakness. You wouldn't want to go into an endgame there. So let's look at the safe, sane move, retreating the knight back, supporting the f5 break in the future. So we're going to look at two moves here, both g4 and bishop d3. So we'll start with bishop d3. And are we ready to play f4 right away? Or f5 right away?
You got it, Jesse. Pawn to
Boom, there we go.
f5. We're just going to plow ahead with the plan. We already have the space advantage on the king side, and white's advantage is on the queen side. So if you notice this pawn structure, our pawns on e5 and d6, you can see that this pawn chain points king side. that's where we have the extra space. And what we're going to do coming up is we're going to try to create a V formation, put this pawn up here instead, and then we have both directions with the V. So that's
The
kind of our
flying V,
plan.
baby.
Flying V, that's right. Pawn to F3. We're going to look at some different plans for white on move 11, but most people are going to start with this very solid setup, pawn to F3. What are we going to do here?
If so, after pawn F3, we can develop knight F6. And like Matt said, we're looking at an improved King's Indian here because normally in the King's Indian, you play knight F6 early on in the variation. But here we got to play F5 before committing our knight to F6. So it's kind of like we saved ourselves a tempo there. So it's like a queen or a King's Indian defense gone good, gone well.
Gone wild?
Um,
Good.
or so knight GE2, we're going to castle here, and I think white's asking for trouble if they go kingside here because all of our pawns are focused that way. So let's look at queen D2, and now it really looks like they're going to go queenside in this position.
Yeah, and with our knight out on F6, that does remove one defender from the H6 square. So be on the lookout for bishop to H6. We're going to show a cool move now. Pawn to C5. We like to have these sort of chess goals wrinkles. They're not always novelties, but they're rare moves that kind of have some different imbalances that we can play for. I like this move a lot. Pawn to C5, creating that V formation with the pawns like we talked about. And this allows us to push our pawns up on both flanks. Usually you want to play in the direction of your pawn chain, and our pawn chain goes both directions. That's what I really love about this move. Let's start with bishop to H6, and then we'll also circle back and look at what happens if en passant or queenside castle. So bishop H6.
All right, and this line is going to go quite far, so we're showing a bunch of moves here just to show like a sample plan how the game could potentially go. So bishop h6, we're actually going to do something that we don't recommend all that often, but we're going to chop. So we're going to take on h6, allow black's queen to get in here, but look at this bare queen. It has no support at all. All of his pieces are offside, rook here, so we shouldn't be afraid of the queen coming in. And actually, that queen could almost be a vulnerability. Like it's kind of, if we could get in f4 here, it's kind of running out of squares. So we'll take a look a little bit at that in the future. And actually, boom, f4 is on the board. And now you're already looking a little scared for that queen. Where's he going to go?
Yep, pawn to G3. White's trying to open up the king side. And like Jesse said, that bishop is completely trapped. So if you're studying these lines in Chessable, don't feel you have to go to the very end of this line. Like Jesse mentioned, we're just showing you kind of a sample of what could happen here coming up. And I think this is a really cool example that shows, hey, our king's not in any danger, even though at first glance it might appear to be. So we're going to play knight to H5 here, and we have a crazy threat. If we have king H8 and knight G8 played, that queen is trapped. So that's our idea. We're going to stick the king on H8, keep him safe there. There's always going to be at least one pawn on the H file, even if it's a white pawn. And then we're going to maneuver these three minor pieces to all play on the king side, while these three minor pieces have trouble shifting over there. On to G4 by white. If G takes F, we can take back with the knight first, and then we always have the rook to back it up, so we don't need to move this pawn at all. That's one thing to keep in mind. You want this pawn structure solid because that keeps that light square bishop hemmed in like that. King to H8.
It's a scary move.
Yeah, what are we threatening?
Yeah, well, we're threatening this and trapping the queen. So even if they take here, their own pawn is preventing their queen retreat. So that is such a sick move. If you see this move OTB, be scared. Be very scared. If you're playing black here, just pre-move, so it looks like you just kind of slipped. Like, oh no,
Right.
oh no, my knight.
OTB, just touch your king. Be like, I guess I gotta move him.
Yeah, no, yeah, that's right.
So now we
All right.
see queen G5 by white, just desperately trying to get the queen out of there quickly. We can go knight to F6. Oh, I think I made a typo in the text. Oh, no, I didn't. King G7 plus H6. I thought King G7 was check.
Right.
So our plan is this and then H6. So what is white going to do?
Yeah, so we'll give white the benefit of the doubt and see that they see the threat, queen h4. But if we're getting this far, it's kind of likely the white's going to trap their own queen. So just FYI. So if they back their queen up, we can play h5 right away. And this looks like a bit kamikaze because we're just like opening up our king. But if they capture this pawn, which they're going to do here in a couple moves, we'll actually see how this position gets pretty locked down, and we get a lot of the attacking chances. So castles, we'll go knight h7 in this position, a very key move given the next one's coming up. G takes h7, and we close it down with g5, and we're using white's own pawn as shelter. And how exactly is white going to get into our position?
And
Their
so,
own light square bishop is garbage. Look at this. Trapped in behind all their pawns. And I don't know, they can maybe do something like this someday, but that's pretty easy to quash.
yeah, I feel like the best plan for white would be try to get it to f1 into h3 to at least trade it off for our bishop, because we know the action's going to happen on the king side. Queen f2 by white, trying to get their other rook into the game, keep the queen safe. Now we can play knight g8. And the reason we're showing you this line that's going to be 22 moves long is just to give you a sense for the ideas in this position so you're not afraid of having the king what appears to be out in the open. So knight g8, clever move, and we're using this pawn as our defender. h5 by white, h4, excuse me. Now we can go pawn to g4. And after f takes g, we take back with the bishop. White's doubled h pawns don't do anything, and our minor pieces are all coming over to the king side. Rook d to g1, knight to h6 to defend this guy. What's the eval here, and what are we planning on doing next?
Yeah, eval is looking close-ish on shallow depth, so what we're looking at on chess.com right now. But if you let it run for a while on a higher depth, the eval is actually close to negative point or -1. So we have almost a full pawn advantage despite being down a pawn. So that should tell you about the amount of counterplay we have. So our plan, this is where we'll leave the line. So our plan in this position is to play for major piece trades on the king side and utilize our passed f pawn. So if we get this into an endgame, this is an easy win. Just pass that, push the passed f pawn. Good to note too that this could be an annoying move, knight b5 attacking this pawn and like kind of tying our queen down. So a simple move like a6 there could prevent that as well.
Yeah, even with that eval, I just wouldn't want to play this from the white side. It feels like black just has all the play in this position, and Stockfish is saying, yeah, I'm good enough that I'll hold a draw with either side. You know, Stockfish versus Stockfish, it's a draw, but I like this
Yeah,
position.
you flip the board here. Like, what's your move? I can see like one active move. That's it.
Yeah, and we're going
And
to go
you can kind
a6.
of, yeah. And then now what?
All right, so let's circle back to move number 11. We looked at bishop to h6. Let's now take a look at queenside castle for white. And what white's doing here is they're just kind of simply ignoring all the pawns and saying, okay, I'm going to castle first, and then I'll figure out how to attack you on the king side because we're castled opposite. But now our move f4 looks even stronger because this bishop doesn't get to trade off for our bishop. And you could argue the g7 bishop is a bad piece now, trapped in, but you could also argue, hey, white wants to trade that off to open up our king. I don't know, which do you like better?
Uh, both lines are fine. I really like these positions where we get a really big pawn chain going because it creates like easy pawn breaks. So I guess long term, if we're the better player or we know these positions better, hopefully we're able to kind of wait around the weaknesses and know like both of these pawns are or both of these bishops, Freudian slip calling them pawns, both of these
Yes.
bishops are pretty bad. So maybe we can favorably trade off this bishop for a knight in the future and get that like slight advantage.
Makes sense to me. So let's say white goes bishop f2. Now we can play pawn to g5. And the funny thing is, you know white's expecting us to play queenside. We're all taught when the kings are on opposite sides, you got a pawn storm at the opponent's king. We're not doing that here. We're looking at the activity of the pieces. And this is modern chess, like Jesse was talking about. Modern chess says active pieces are what you want to utilize. So we don't have active pieces on the queen side, even though the king position would dictate we play over there. We have king side active pieces. That's where we got to play. So after g5, let's say white plays g3. Makes sense, trying to chip away at these pawns in front of our king. Now we can actually play this crazy looking move, pawn to g4. And this line also goes pretty deep, but it's for the same reason as the last line. I wanted to show you guys some examples of how to play this position with opposite side castling. All right, so what are we threatening here?
All right, so we are threatening g takes. That's kind of a clear pawn with tempo on the knight. And our king we can maybe just tuck away and we'll be fine there. So let's look at if they break the tension and play g takes. So we can actually not take back this way, but we're going to play our own pawn capture. So keep that in mind with this pawn structure. Even if they take here, we can take their pawn, same type of thing with tempo. So let's take a look at how this is going to play out. They are on our pawn, so let's go bishop h6 to counterattack their f pawn, and that is a big threat. So they just mindlessly capture. They're getting into some murky territory with their king and queen lined up. They can't block with the bishop, but that's okay. So king b1, sidestepping, that makes a lot of sense. And we were going to grab the pawn with tempo, so they don't have time to grab this pawn back quite yet.
So now let's say white plays queen to c2. We can go knight to g4. And I'm just impressed with how well these pieces operate with the open G file. Right? We don't care at all that that king's looking exposed on G8 because look at these white pieces. They're having so much trouble getting into the game. Okay, so knight G4, knight takes F3 by white. And now we can play knight G6. So notice again, all four of these pieces are either on the king side or in the case of this guy on C8, ready to play over here on the king side. Rook D to G1, lining up with our king. King to h8, though. We simply sidestep it. The eval's minus 0.2. What do you feel about this position, Jesse?
It looks a little scary, but this is the exact type of position you're looking for if you're trying to like win. Like if you're playing OTB, maybe this is like your weapon to just complicate the game, create chaos, take some risk and win the game. But if you're playing for winning chances for black, all kinds of winning chances. There's no way that white has like an advantage that they had out of the opening here. So this is where we're going to leave this position. So our plan from here on is to keep playing on the king side. So maybe moves like knight takes f2, grabbing the bishop, bishop h6, knight f4, bishop d7, queen e7, transfer the a rook across the board all the way this way, and just line up on the open files and play with our active pieces.
Yeah, that sounds great. And kind of one of the reasons I made this course was just like you mentioned, Jesse. I wanted to make a course where we could counterattack white's setup and always have really good winning chances, even though there are some potential risks when you do that, not playing quite as solid as maybe the French defense or the Caro-Kann. I think this is a great course to outplay your opponent in sort of complicated positions, but they're also positional positions, meaning a lot of times there are pawns locked up, and we use the pawn structure to dictate the play. I find in my own games that works really well, and I think it's also easier to teach those kind of positions. We can look at the pawn structure first. All right, third option for white. D takes C6 right after we played C5 en passant. If you're below a certain rating, your opponents will not even notice en passant is available. But this is a decent move, and we're going to take back. And the
Yeah,
nice thing of, yeah, go
there's
ahead.
like tiers of rating, or like 500 under, they'll never play en passant. Like 600 to 2000, they'll always play en passant.
Yes.
So let's take a look at en passant. So we'll take back with the b pawn, keeping this pawn structure intact. So maybe we can play this again. Castles, and let's develop our bishop. Bishop e6. Plan is to actually play d5 this time with the bishop supporting and break in the middle, and yeah, just open up the center. So at this point, we're kind of like in new territory. There's not like a whole lot of games in this. But yeah, only two in the master database, but both games went similar to, or both games, they played b3, which is interesting.
Yeah, it's a very prophylactic solid move, I guess you could say. And we're going to play d5 here. And this is a big advantage. When you let Stockfish run a little bit, it's a minus 1.5 eval. And I tried to break down the reasons for that. We have active pieces, and when the skirmishes in the center all open up, I think it's going to favor black. And also, the king's safety seems to favor us as well. So now we have this different style of position where instead of having the center all locked up and we play kingside, notice how our f pawn is still on f5. It's not up on f4, and also this pawn's not locked up. So we're actually looking to attack on the light squares here, knowing that we have some better chances to get at the white king. So more tactics in this position, a little bit less strategic play. Should we go to move 7, g4?
Yeah, let's go all the way back. So this is a big chapter. So if you're struggling, just bear with us as you're going to spend a lot of time on this chapter. The next two chapters are a lot shorter, though. I think we have 7 lines next chapter and maybe 6 the chapter after.
That's right.
So you get a little treat for putting in all the hard work in this chapter. So let's take a look at g4, a funky looking move. That pawn is defended, so we can't snatch it. And let's counterattack with f5. Um, g4 is kind of a rare option, but I think best is just to directly strike back. And let's kind of see how this is going to play out. They take with the g pawn. We're, of course, going to take back with the pawn. Need to watch out for queen h5 check, but right now we can block with the knight. Or slide over. Okay, we're not blocking with the knight. We're sidestepping. Okay,
Yeah.
tell me about that.
So this was a very tough line to come up with a recommendation because g4 is a strong move, but it's also rare enough that I didn't want to get you guys into some crazy territory. But this is one to memorize. You want to know that this is going to happen in advance so that you're not surprised. But this line is not a problem at all. So we're going to go king f8, and we have the closed center still, right? So even though these pawns could trade, that's actually fine for us because we just put our knight or bishop on f5. The rest of the center is still closed. Bishop to
Yeah,
h3. Go
I'm
ahead.
actually seeing back when I recommended this move is that they can actually just take, and now we're in some trouble.
Yeah, we're going to have to try to bail out with the queen trade, I think, there.
Yep. Okay, so carry on. Sorry, sorry.
That's fine. So bishop h3. This is the top move among masters, so I wanted to show this because I think this is more likely to be a high rating opponent, not so likely to be a low rating opponent. So we're going to go knight f6. And I like this move because it's just simple. Knight f6, kick the queen. This pawn's already guarded, so she's not going to take. Queen retreats. Now we go f4, which is very similar to what we've seen in other lines. Lock up the pawns in the center. We are offering a trade of light square bishops, which is white's bad bishop. So it's not as nice as when that bishop's sitting on d3, but it's still solid. Bishop to d2. White wants to castle queenside. And what are we going to do here, Jesse?
Yeah, and well, before I get there, so f4 is the exact move you want to play when our king is stuck in the center and we can't castle. So really locking down the center, it makes it much more realistic to keep your king in the center and be fine. So after bishop d2, we're going to play a slower looking move, a6, and kind of preventing the knight from coming in, it looks like. And if white goes ahead and castles right away, we're going to attack with b5 going right away.
Yeah.
So let's take a look at white trading off the light square bishops. That makes a lot of sense. Take back with the queen. Again, if they castle here, b5 is a nice attacking move. So now white is offering a queen trade, but we don't have to trade on their terms. So if we take here, they're going to take back and get their knight into the game, looking at the nice g5 square. So we don't necessarily want to allow that. So we can just play b5 anyway, and if they want to trade, then now we get our rook on this nice file. It's going to probably open up pretty soon anyway.
And the nice thing about this position is a lot of the moves are okay still. So you don't have to memorize as much once you get to this point. But I wanted to show this b5 idea because I think it's extremely instructive to note that white cannot win this pawn. They have it double attacked because e4 pawn drops, and that e4 pawn is more important for white than trying to win what's essentially one of our flank pawns. So b5 is just an awesome way to say, all right, I see your king's in the center. I see he wants to go over to c1. I'm going to discourage that move by playing b5, and I'm attacking on both flanks.
Yeah, I like these positions where we can attack on both sides.
Yeah, me too. So now let's look at what happens if white guards this pawn with knight g to e2. Not as common as d5, but this is a super solid move. And this is another one, Jesse, where I went back and forth. I think I had a whole bunch of text planned out for what happens if we play f5. And then I scrapped that, and I was like, what if we go knight f6 here? Then I scrapped that, and I was like, okay, this is only one line. What can we play that's pretty simple, that's, lets me to rare move with maybe a rare move and keep it as easy as possible? And I decided, let's take e takes d4. And after knight takes d4, let's go knight g to e7. So white does have the extra space, but they still have the bad bishop. And we're going to take you guys 5 more moves down this line, show you what can happen. And this actually came from a bullet game. And I think there were multiple bullet games between these guys in this position. Ali Reza Firouzja, who just had an awesome candidates tournament, against Magnus Carlsen, and Carlsen was playing black.
Yeah, so we are following Magnus's line, which is pretty cool. So
Yep.
bishop e2, just developing, and we can go bang f5. This is exactly what Magnus was playing, and we are ready to castle and capture. I am terrible at these arrows. Capture and continue the game from there. Maybe even knight f5 after recapture. So, oops, skipped way ahead. Spoilers. Never didn't see it. Okay, e takes, and we can take back with the knight. If they take us, we can, of course, take back with the bishop. No reason to mess up our pawn structure. Castles, castles, bishop f3, and we are actually still following Magnus versus Firouzja in this position. And if they do capture, can mess up our pawns a little bit. So maybe we want to play queen d7 to add just a little bit of protection on that knight. Also connect the rooks and get the queen. You don't really want to go to an open file either with the queen.
And Magnus did beat Firouzja in this game. This is one of the lines where white has a very, very tiny edge, somewhere around 0.2, 0.3. And I think it's just due to having a little bit more space in the center. I think there's great winning chances for both sides. And it was a simple line. I didn't want to show you guys anything too crazy for this rare move, knight g to e2. All right, now we're going back to move number 5, and we will look at knight to f3. So that's this position. We looked at bishop e3. We're going to do 3 lines with knight to f3, second most popular move at the club level, 4th most popular move at the master level, and it's because of this next move that we're about to play. What are we going to do?
All right, we are going to actually pin that knight, bishop g4. So we're still wanting to play e5, but with the knight coming out, there's a little more white control over that square. And if we go for that, we can kind of get mass trades, and that's not really what we're looking for. So let's instead pin the knight, bishop g4, and we're going to look at 2 different moves here. Bishop e3 and d5. We'll start with bishop e3 developing. And in this position, we're actually, or I guess, are securing this pawn. We're actually not going e5 here. We're doing something different.
Yes. Oh, what happened?
Just kidding, we are playing e5. But we're playing d5. I was reading ahead a little bit too far. Sorry, everyone, outtakes. So we are playing e5, so we're sticking with the plan. Sorry about that. After d5, I totally missed e5 in the notation. I just saw d5, so there's d5. And now we got to move our knight. And here we actually are going up. The difference here is that this knight is pinned, so there's really only one attacker on our knight, and that is bishop.
Yeah, and also when our bishop was on c8, it just worked a little bit better because, yeah, like Jesse said, what h3 could be played, kicking our bishop, and then we don't want the triple attackers on d4. That's how you can remember that. When our bishop's on g4, we're not going knight e7. We're going to put the knight up on d4. Okay, bishop e2 by white. And now we're going to take. Bishop takes f3. Black is winning 52% to white's 39% in the club database. And in the master database, black is scoring 62% overall. So even if you look at the eval, you're going to see 0.0 somewhere around there. But black is just dominating in this position after the trade. White takes back. And now, Jesse, we're going to play pawn to c5. There it is, the V formation. I love this position already. What do you think?
Yeah, me too. And now we are really cementing our knight in here, assuming no en passant. If they ever take, then that is a nasty passed pawn. You could probably take either way. And that is going to be very difficult to defend in any sort of end game. So really locking in the pawn there. So let's just say that they take the pawn. That makes sense. We don't really want to take back with the knight since our knight is well placed upon d4. So let's take back with our c pawn, and now we're almost ready to play it again.
That's right.
So white castles. Let's start with rook b8. b3 defending pawn, and let's just complete our development here. So knight e7. Like Matt was saying, this eval is going to be pretty flat, like a slight edge for white here, but our plan is to play c5 like I was talking about, knight e6, c to e6. So I guess this knight, we have c to e6, even though I guess we
No,
don't
this
really
way,
need
this
it.
way. Knight e to c6.
Oh, C knight E to C6. Sorry,
Yeah.
I was looking at E6, not C6. Okay,
I think I put a
and then we
typo
can.
in. Yeah, it's a typo.
Oh, okay, okay. And then we will castle and play F5 and go about our normal plan. Okay.
Yep. And I think that's a pretty comfy position for us.
Yep.
So now let's look at what happens if we go back to move 8. What if white captures the knight? This is a small mistake. You'll see the eval go up in black's favor. We're going to take back with the pawn. And I should mention that move bishop takes d4 is played about 25% of the time. So it's a fairly common move. Knight to b5. And white's thinking, hey, maybe I can just win that pawn back. He looks vulnerable out there. But we're going to use this move again. Bishop takes f3. And you might be thinking, okay, well, what if white takes with the pawn, right? Because there's still two attackers on d4, only the one defender. We can actually play pawn to c5 here. And if this is not in the notes, but if d takes c6, b takes c6, and white tries to grab this pawn, we can actually go queen a5 check. And there's only one good move for white, Jesse. King to e2.
Ah, I see.
And this is over a -1 eval for us, so we already have a nice attacking position.
Yeah, the idea is if they block with the queen, we can just chop, king takes, and their knight is hanging at the end.
Yep, and we actually stopped the line back where we first played c5. Here we said the eval is -2.2, and we said our plan is to play knight f6, castle kingside. And there's really not a great plan for white because they have to figure out where do they put their king, and we always have that protected pass pawn sitting there on d4, and their knight actually looks a little offsides on b5.
So very tricky move here, capturing. And at first, it looks like white's going to win this pawn, but not so easy with that handy queen a5 check move.
So now let's see when we first pin the knight. So going back to bishop g4, what if white plays d5 here? And in this position, there's no knight back to e7 because we have a pawn sitting there. So what are we going to play?
Yeah, we could go forward. I guess we could go forward to e5 or d4,
Mhm.
but let's let's stay consistent and go d4. And now we're really applying some pressure on this knight, looking to completely mess up their pawns. So the knight here is a very strong piece. I like that.
So
And then we're oh yeah, and at the same time we're also threatening here, followed by c5 as well, and then maybe e5 to come. So after bishop e2, let's go for it. Bishop takes, and c5 is on the board again. It's like the first time c5 is coming on the board before e5. So we're still going for the flying V, but different move order, I guess.
yeah, and it's hard to say if it's better to have this pawn on e5, or in some cases you may just want that bishop pointing all the way across the long diagonal. So we have flexibility here. We can always play e5 later, but we might not play it. Castle by white, knight to f6. And our plan here is we're going to play that knight to d7 and keep that bishop open along the diagonal. bishop to e3 by white. And I wanted to show you guys a very interesting idea here. You can play knight to d7. That's completely fine. But let's look at a sacrifice. So keep this one in mind. You can castle here. So what do we think white's going to do?
Wow, that's interesting. So I assume white's going to take the pawn. So they can take, we take back, take with the queen. But there's maybe potentially some issue here that our bishop is X-raying their queen, and we can go for knight d7, so immediately expose the queen out in the middle of the board, queen e3, and queen b6, and we can actually look to take this into an endgame. If they take, I assume the idea is to take their knight and mess up the pawns, is that right?
Yeah, so we don't have that one in the text. But if they take, we take with knight, hitting this pawn. And I guess the only way to defend it is this, and then rook a to c8. There's no b3 because the knight gets captured. So we're going to immediately win that pawn back and have future pressure on the queen side. So it's actually bad for them to trade queens, even though they're up a pawn. That's what I really thought was cool about this move.
Yeah, interesting. So let's look at if they decline the queen trade, queen e2. Uh, Now we're going to take the knight,
Yep.
and they'll take back. And these pawns are going nowhere, especially with this blockade coming up. White has no dark square bishop and no knight to actually defend our knight here. So these pawns are forever blockaded if we choose to do that. We'll go 95 though. We'll go the other way, 95. Um, and here the eval is pretty flat, and we have a classic good knight versus bad bishop. I mean, these pawns still can't do anything, right? Because we're just going to take.
Right.
So 95 is probably a little more active, getting a little closer to the king.
And here we're going
So
for dark square strategy. We're going to put the queen on c7. We're going to go b6, a5, rook c8, and just pile up on those double pawns. What do you think?
yep, it seems like a position where these pawns are falling, and we have the classic good knight versus bad bishop. So hopefully that can we can expose that into a long-term advantage.
And you know what I love about this opening in general, playing the modern? I
What?
think the stats showed it was only played somewhere around 2% of the time. So as
Hmm.
long as you guys are playing a lot of games, whether it's blitz, rapid, classical, a mix of all of them, you're playing a ton of games in these modern positions and you have a good sense, like even just a decent sense of how to play these positions, I think you're going to outscore your opponents quite often. And you find that's why grandmasters use the modern all the time to try to outplay slightly weaker grandmasters or international masters. They know that the modern is a great weapon to play for the win. Okay, Jesse, move number 5. So we just played knight c6. What are we going to do if white plays a real quick d5?
Yeah, that's a good question. So after a very quick d5, we can just go knight d4 right away. So I think in all these lines, we're bringing the knight to d4. We're never going to e5.
That's right.
Although e5 is a fine move. Knight to e5 is a fine move in this position if you choose to go your own path. Can't blame us if you go wrong.
You go your own way?
We're yeah. We're going knight d4. Let's look at bishop e3. So now we have two attackers on the knight, and we have two options here. We can go c5, or sorry, we can go e5, or we can go c5, and we are going to recommend c5.
Yeah.
So you have in the note e5 is playable, but that allows white to move order us, and we get a slightly different line. And here we're able to maybe transpose if white plays the right sorts of moves.
Yeah, I didn't want to
Um,
have a position where we were essentially doing a different option with a transposition. So on
yeah.
c5, knight g to e2, and here queen to b6. We're going to play for the initiative, and white has to be ready for queen takes b2. Pause. Oh, sorry, that was a teleprompter. It said pause. Queen queen d2 by white, guarding the pawn. And now we're going to play pawn to f5. So we don't have our normal flying v with the pawn on e5. We're still going to play f5. And again, I'm showing this line because I wanted you guys to learn this fighting idea. There's going to be a lot of modern positions like this where you don't have to have the move memorized. Like I'm looking at the top stockfish moves, knight f6, bishop to d7, f5, and they're all almost identical evals, right? You can play any of them. But I want to show you this idea because you can have this in your toolbox when you see a similar setup and you can think, okay, is this an effective place to play f5? What is white going to do here?
Yeah, let's give white castles. Castles long makes a lot of sense. And we have a capture here, knight to e2 check, take back, and queen a5. So again, playing, so we have a threat here, take the knight, win the pawn, or even take, and really mess up their pawns long term. Let's look at f3. Is there anything else you wanted to say about queen a5? I see some notes here.
I simply just like the imbalances coming up with this capture you're already talking about.
Okay. All right, so we'll show the next few moves here. This line goes a little bit farther into the weeds. So after a simple move like f3, let's capture. Let's capture again and mess up the pawns. Capture another pawn, so f takes that pawn. F takes e4. And after all of this, knight f6, and we have a little bit of pressure on this pawn as well.
And one thing I
And
like about this position a lot is at the club level, players are very materialistic. It's extremely likely that you're going to see a move like bishop to d3, trying to simply guard that pawn on e4. That's a horrible strategic choice. And even though the Stockfish eval only dropped to minus 0.3 on low depths, you can play knight g4, stick the knight on e5, and we're getting back into that classic good knight against bad bishop with all these light pawns locking it in. So keep that in mind. Your opponents are very likely to mess up here, but we're going to show you the strongest move, pawn to e5. And how we react to this is we take the pawn, bishop takes c5, and now I'm going a little bit deeper. Jesse mentioned this is a long line, just to kind of show you guys how it could unfold. Knight to e4, attacking this pawn, attacking the bishop. Bishop retreats, knight takes c3, the rook moves, and bishop to f5. Eval's only minus 0.3, only. But you look at this position, and it's like our pieces are all over in white's camp. We got the knight sitting there near the king. We got the bishop cutting across. The rook is going to come over here in 2 seconds and get on the c file. What do you think about this position?
yeah, definitely a lot of initiative for black. And we are up a pawn right now, even though this e pawn is probably likely to drop in the future. But yeah, we can easily pressure. Queens are off the board, so I feel like our king position is a little better. We're not really going to get checkmated in this position. So yeah, the eval is a slight advantage for black, and I think black has just a lot easier of a plan, easier moves to make.
Yep, I agree with you. And I think that's what these lines are all about, right? We see the eval, it's equal, but we just want it to be easier to play for us. Okay, back to move number 4, all the way back. Instead of knight to c3, which was played 60% of the time, we're going to look at knight to f3. And when we see a knight on f3 in the Kotov variation, which is these 3 pawns up, what are we going to do?
Yep, we're going to pin that knight. Bishop g4. We've seen this in a few other lines, but this one should be an easy one to remember because we're looking to play e5 in a lot of these lines, and we want to just basically remove white's control over that square as much as possible. So there's a couple moves you're going to look at here. Bishop moves, e2 and d3. Let's start with bishop e2. And here we are actually going to just take right away.
Yeah.
And yeah, so what's the idea behind taking right away here?
So it's another unprompted capture, but what we're going to do is go for that same setup where we try to lock in that light square bishop for white behind all of their pawns on light squares. So we can very quickly go at this white center. We remove that defender on f3, that knight that was guarding d4, and now we already have a double attack. So this is unique to the modern, right? There's no knight on f6. We got bishop g4 in early. This is a position where your opponent is probably already out of book. We're only on move 6. So they're going to try to defend this pawn. And now we go pawn to e5. Keep an eye on that bishop, locked in by that pawn, this pawn, potentially that pawn if he goes back. And we now have a triple attack on d4. So we're also playing for the initiative. Pawn to d5. And here we have that choice again, Jesse. Do we go to e7 or do we go to d4? The reason I don't like going to e7, and this one's kind of hard to remember, so you may have to rewatch this part of the video. White has that crazy move g4 again, and it actually kind of hinders our kingside play, and we don't have the queenside play yet. So we're going to recommend knight to d4 here.
So just be on the lookout for g4. That can be our cue. That can be like a tiebreaker, whether you go here or here. It can be said knight e7, you're not going to lose. It's an okay move, but it does allow the g4 move. So bishop takes, we'll take back with the pawn. And we're gonna follow the main moves that you're gonna see at the club level starting here. So castles and c5 again. So really locking in this pawn. And now we have a protected pass pawn. So that is good news. If they take with the pawn, we can take back. This pawn is still defended by our bishop, of course. And e5. So white is breaking in the center slash sacrificing a pawn. What's the deal with e5?
I had to show e5 because, again, it's one of those moves where if white doesn't play e5, they might be in trouble pretty quickly here, right? If we get a blockade on e5 and get this pawn well defended, white needs to go after our king very quickly. So I'm showing you the strongest move by white just to have you prepared for it, because I want to make sure that we're able to safely get castled here. So we're going to start with knight e7. We're going to ignore this pawn. After e takes d6, we take with the queen. And now we're ready to castle. So move like rook to e1 doesn't scare us at all. Simply castle out of it. And we still have this pass pawn defended by our bishop. So let's say knight to d2. And the idea here is white wants to play knight to e4, which is a super strong move. And we actually want to be ready for this before we castle. You could castle here. It's close to the eval for the move we're recommending. But I recommend pawn to d3. So what's the idea with this move, Jesse?
Yeah, so I don't know.
So knight e4 is threatened, and this opens up a square for our queen.
Okay, so that opens up the d4 square for us. Is that the idea?
Yeah.
Okay. There you have it. All right. Sometimes I need a little hand holding here. We have the master and the amateur, so get the back and forth. Makes sense, makes sense. So we need a good square for our queen. d4 is a nice square, and it's going to be hard to kick out of d4 once it's there. So that's why d3 makes sense. So plan here, we're going to play queen d4, of course, after they kick us with the knight. Then we will castle, and then put the f rook on d8, the a rook on b8, play in the open files, and just kind of pressure on the queen side.
Yep, that's right. I think you owe me one tough question, so you can queue
Okay.
one up later.
Okay.
So here, after we did the initial knight pin, we looked at bishop e2. Now we're going to look at bishop to e3. This one's a bit less accurate than bishop to e2, but it's very common at the club level. And here I wanted to stay consistent. So we're going to play bishop takes f3 right away. Queen takes f3. And here's the cool thing, Jesse. This is played 92% of the time at the club level. So bishop e3, let's go back a little bit. This is a club level type move because white wants to play probably queen to d2, throw their h-pawn up the board, bishop h6, take, queen takes, check, check, checkmate, right? Hikaru arrows. The problem with this line is after bishop takes f3, queen takes f3, we can play pawn to c5. Double attack on this pawn, and the b2 pawn is vulnerable. If we get bishop takes b2 in, then the rook in the corner dies. So what is white going to try to do here to hold the pawn?
Yeah, I think white's got to look themselves in the mirror and say, well, I need to defend the pawn. I can't defend it with anything other than queen d1. I believe that is actually the only move that defends the pawn. I guess e5 holds it. I mean, that just loses a different pawn in a different way, but same type of thing. So queen d1 we'll go with. And we can simply put more pressure on the pawn with knight c6. If they push past, this rook is still dying in the corner, so they can't really do that.
Yeah, and our plan is simple, right? We're just going to grab that
Oh,
pawn and convert.
sorry, I got way ahead of us.
Oh, we're done with that one. Okay, let's go back
Okay.
here.
Okay,
Move number
sorry.
4. And now you were just speeding us along. It's a long chapter, right?
Come on, let's get this chapter done.
Yeah,
No, I'm
we're on
kidding.
the 12th line though. 49 minutes in. Let's look at the 4 pawn setup. Pawn to f4 by white. So after f4, instead of meeting this with an immediate dark squared strategy, and like we tried to play e5 in the other lines, sometimes c5, we're going to start with the 10th most popular move, Jesse. We're meeting a rare move with a rare move of our own, pawn to f5. What do you think about this?
I like it. I like that it's the 10th most common move, like we're gambiting a gambit. So there's like 4 games in this, but it's still a perfectly sound move, and white can't really pass or push past because it really makes the pawns really shaky, and we're actually gonna get an example of that. So E5 is a bit of a mistake, and it's played 80% of the time. And this is like 500 games are in this position, and 80% of them make this mistake, pushing past. So instead of relieving any of the tension, we'll go C5, and you can see if they capture something, well, now we're on the D pawn. So this is opening up in our favor, and we're actually going to go down a line with a few captures here, and we're going to see just how dangerous this can really be for white. So knight f3, most common move. Again, a bit of a mistake because it allows us to capture here. And this is a very forced sequence coming up. So one thing that I like how Matt does these courses is if we're down a rare line, let's just go for a forced sequence. So you only need to remember one line. We don't need to worry about 10 different moves in this position because we just played the 10th most common move. Like white's not going to know if they're doing any better than us. So let's go down a forced line, and especially one that's going to land us in a good position. So c takes, queen takes d4, knight c6, attacking the queen and putting more pressure on this pawn. Um, let's look at what happens after queen d5 here. So what are we looking for?
Yeah, so here we have a nice little tactic, and it's going to involve a queen trade. So if you look at the pawn on e5, it's attacked 1, 2, 3 times. How many times is it defended? 1, 2, 3 times. So it doesn't look like we can win any material. But the problem for white is, after we take, we are threatening a queen trade. So if white were to take back with the pawn, for example, we take their queen, then on the next move we win the pawn. So the most likely move for white is going to be they take our queen, because they know if our knight takes back, now we're not winning the pawn here. We have to take with the king. So I wanted to show you guys this line because we're losing castling rights, but we're winning a pawn. And this end position has an eval of minus 1.4. So we actually have even a larger advantage than the one pawn. What do you think of this position?
Yep, I think our bishop is going to be a monster. This bishop can be a monster if we get it fianchettoed or even just developed normally. We can develop the knight, maybe even here, but we'll get the knight out. And again, this is an endgame. King in the center is no big deal. And we're up a pawn. So there's it's everything you can hope for. We've said this in the past, but we have like the pawn and the compensation for it. So we should
Yes.
be very happy in this position.
It's like my favorite phrase when evaluating a position, material
Yeah.
and the compensation for it.
Yeah.
So that's our 12th and final line, Kotov variation chapter. When white builds that huge center, pawns on e4, d4, and c4. And I was happy with this chapter, Jesse, because in the past, when I played the modern defense a little bit, this was always the scariest formation, I thought, from the black side, because essentially they're trying to get a King's Indian defense. And the King's Indian defense is not really what we want to play. The evals for the King's Indian almost always favor white, but I think we've got some really nice dark square strategy lines that don't get us into that kid territory. So that was chapter 3, Kotov variation. The next 2 chapters are a little bit shorter, like Jesse mentioned, and they're going to be aggressive lines for white. We're going to look at the 150 attack attempt and the Austrian attack attempt. So stay tuned, and we'll see you guys in the next chapter.